Okay, so now we're continuing on chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna has come out of his dejection and had encountered Krishna's skepticism. Where'd come this cowardice? He was thrown into a state where he realized he did not know what to do, and he surrendered to Krishna. Then Krishna revealed the nature of the soul, the undying soul, and the principle of reincarnation, the fact that the soul never dies. It goes through births and deaths and births and deaths, but who we are in essence is eternal. This essence is the foundation for discrimination. When you know yourself as the soul, you know yourself as something other than the outer personality, something other than your mind and your thoughts and your beliefs, your emotions, your story, your history. So he's being here conceptually introduced to the principle that what we are in truth, what we are really, is this eternal principle of the soul that never dies, is never born. So this idea of reincarnation is this idea of the continuity of the consciousness through lifetimes after lifetimes after lifetimes. Now just imagine if you, as you are now, never died. Suppose you, this person, that you, could live eternally, never die. How would you live? How would you design your life? How would you organize yourself? What would be your sense of time? What would be your sense of importance? How would the issues and the dramas and the problems that are occurring now, how would they show up as you, if you knew you were eternal and you could not die? This is like a doorway into the possibility of you as the soul, this timeless state of consciousness. Now, of course, if we, as our individual personalities, laughed eternally, it would be another form of hell, frankly. We would grow weary of being ourselves for eternity. Give us a couple of 100 years and we'd be done. We'd want to change it in for a new one. And the advantage of dying is everything's more precious. Things are more interesting. Life has got more edge to it when you have the possibility of it ending. But this principle of reincarnation is not something you can actually know directly, but what you can know directly is your eternal, unchanging nature. So once you have a sense, that means either in your awareness or in your experience of what the Gita is describing here as the soul, you're moving in relationship to something other than the usual surface personality, the outer focused identity, the world that exists outside of us and our relationship to that, and the stories that we create internally about our relationship to that. We move into touch with a reference point that's out of it. It's like a fish out of the water of the samskara of water. And then when it's out of the water, it can know something of water. But when it's in the water, there's no way to know it. This is the same thing. Touching the soul gives us a vantage point, a reference point, by which we can know the nature of our condition, the nature of who we are, the nature of what we think we are versus what we truly are, what is really true and what is not true. This is the foundational message of this chapter, this ability to know what is real and not real from a vantage point of the soul. But of course, at this time in the Bhagavad Gita, it's the first step in the journey, so it's really an introduction. It's just a showing, a pointing to that possibility. this reorienting of our attention, our consciousness, so that it becomes attentive to that possibility of us as soul, is really what is being suggested in this entire chapter. This turning away of our attention outwardly, inwardly. So in our last reading, we completed this description of the soul with verse 77. So now we're going to start with verse 78.
Looking from the perspective of Dharma, you should not get perturbed either, since for a warrior like you there is no greater cause than to fight for Dharma. Arjuna, fortunate is the warrior who gets such an opportunity to fight for a right cause. It opens the gates to heaven. Therefore, if you refuse to fight this righteous war, you will lose your fame and also incur sin from shirking your ordained duty. People will also perpetually blame you. For a man of honor, this defamation will be worse than death. All these great warriors who once admired you will laugh at you, thinking that you are withdrawing from battle out of fear. Your enemies too will laugh at you, belittling your strength. Can there be a greater sorrow than this? Arjuna, if you die, you will attain heaven, and if you win, you will be the ruler of this earth. Therefore, get up and fight with determination. If you accept happiness and sorrow, profit and loss, victory and defeat in equal spirit, and fight the battle, you will never incur sin.
Okay. So this is the principle of Dharma. Dharma basically is those actions that sustain us in terms of our purpose, our possibility. Each of us are born with a possibility. We're all come into this world with the possibility to bring forward something into the creation. And our innate nature and our life and our circumstances are all the opportunity for doing so. So Dharma are the actions that we take that are aligned with our innate nature and with the original intent of existence, the evolutionary movement of consciousness into the becoming. We all have a role to play in that movement, consciously or unconsciously. And we are born into that as a possibility. There is never an assurance, especially since we have will and choice. We have self-awareness, will, and choice. A deer or a plant, it doesn't have any choice. We have choice. The nature of Dharma is quite powerful in the entire concept of Gita. It's basically what we would say the right actions. How do we live? Now Arjuna is in this dilemma. He is confronted with this circumstance in which the choice of his actions are critical. And right now, he is in the process of perhaps going into error in terms of manifesting the innate potentiality, bringing it out into an actuality. And in his case, as a warrior who fights for the right cause, for a noble purpose. And it's saying that if we follow that path, if we follow the higher possibility that we all contain within us, then it is as if we attain heaven while we attain the fruits of this earth. We attain both worlds. We gain the blessings and the bounty and the abundance of this life, as well as the blessing and the bounty of moving into relationship with our true nature, allowing for peace, equanimity, happiness, presence. So Gita's basically saying that if you live your Dharma, you're progressing spiritually, if you know it or not. that in each case, each time we succeed in manifesting the innate possibility in us, we move further personally and into relationship with the truth of who we are and its interface in this world of creation, of mind, body, and life. So it's a very fundamental principle. It's touched upon here and elsewhere in the Gita, in the later chapters, especially in chapter 18. It gets very specific, that we each have our own unique path, our own unique Dharma. And finding that in us, or not finding it in us, determines our ability to know ourselves as the soul. Many young people, many people I've worked with, are in a state of suffering because they have not fully manifest the inherent possibility they carried within them. For some people, this inherent possibility is very practical, very functional. But for some, it's to strive always for the highest possibilities. For some of us, we were born to come to God, to progress on the spiritual path, and to develop that possibility of moving into the truth of who we are. And for others, we're in some intermediary place. So each of us have a unique Dharma. If we leap or try to leap this Dharma, the possibility that we carried with us, with our birth, our parents, our karma, our programming, and our conditioning, then we have to go back and process that incomplete portion of our Dharma. It acts as debris, acts as error that weighs down our ability to progress spiritually. Now, some of these errors aren't in our control. Some of these errors are due to the randomness of circumstances. Like I say, life is a crapshoot. It's like parachuters in World War II jumping out of the airplane, and only a certain number of them actually get on the ground and function. Some are crippled and wounded and have to crawl around. There are some that get completely destroyed. The relationship between us being able to live aligned with our Dharma or not often determines if we experience dejection or not, or the poignancy, the intensity of the ejection. Because dejection comes also when we are not fulfilling our Dharma, when we're not living the life aligned with our inner nature. Now, how can you know? If you're living the life aligned with your inner nature, there is more happiness, more clarity, more presence, more truth. There's a sense of purpose. You have, I won't say enthusiasm, but a willingness to step into life each day, to do what needs to be done. There isn't a great degree of fatigue or fear or depression, which come when you're not following your Dharma or when you've been diverted from your path of Dharma. And this confusion and error, this lack of clarity, the lack of energy or effectiveness, acts as a debris, building debris and making it harder for us to move on the path. So dejection comes more poignantly in the second case. Dejection in the first case is usually an indicator of momentary pause and the recognition that there's another level of knowledge that has to be revealed. But first you have to recognize the limitation of the knowledge you do have. First you have to meet your ego at the level you haven't met it at yet, in order before you can go beyond it. Now, this nature of Dharma we just touch upon here, but basically Krishna is saying, Arjuna, you are already on a track. You already are doing what you should do. Withdrawing from this will cause you great pain, and you'll be forced to do it because of your innate nature anyway. You cannot withdraw from your Dharma, but you will create true sin. Your true sin would be not to kill those relatives, not to destroy those attachments, those identifications that are before you, seeking to destroy you. And that sin is the true sin, not the sin that you imagine is true in your prajnavati, in your rationalizations and justifications, in your false truth that's come from your ego, that's currently taken over you at this moment. This weakness of heart, this fearfulness. The nature of Arjuna's state when he surrendered to Krishna is this recognition that what he thought he knew, he didn't. It's the second stage of knowing, I should say the second stage of ignorance. The first stage of ignorance is you don't know you're ignorant. Second stage of ignorance is you think you know, but you don't. So that's where Arjuna was in his rationalizations and justifications. He thought he knew, but Krishna just pointed out something to him that made him recognize, I don't know. Now that third state is you know you don't know, or you meet that part in you that doesn't know. And that experience is a humility. It is a humbling. It is a letting go of what you thought you knew, and it always is accompanied by confusion and doubt. This trepidation that comes up in that moment of the beginning of a new insight. So this transition, this third state of ignorance, is what moves us into, has the possibility of moving us into a true state of knowingness. And that's when he could start hearing Krishna from a different vantage point. This is when life became revelatory. It came in beyond his normal understanding in the humility. And from that he could surrender. He recognized that what was before him was describing a truth, a higher truth that he could recognize. And he realized the limitation of his previous truth. And that was the opening, the door opening, from which then the revelation of the soul came and the foundation of discrimination. So the whole Gita is actually about Arjuna being able to fulfill his Dharma. The last verse of the Gita is, I am now willing, my delusion has been removed, and I am now willing and free to do as directed by thee. So this complete surrender occurs at the very end. This first surrender, this first humiliation, is the beginning of many that took 18 chapters for Arjuna to come to. So now we'll go on to the next concept in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the yoga of the intellect. So please go forward.
Arjuna, the wisdom that you just received belongs to the tradition of Samkhya. Now hear from me the essence of the yoga of intellect, which will enable you to be free from the bondage of action. In this approach, there is no loss, no fear of contrary result, nor is there any apprehension of incurring sin. Even a little progress saves one from great fear. The intellect is focused on one goal in this approach, whereas it wanders in different directions in other approaches due to endless desires.
This is the uniqueness of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita points to a goal, one that can be intellectually grasped. This idea that you're the soul, and that knowing the soul, being in relationship to that principle, and living life from that place is the purpose. And this chapter describes this. It describes the states of consciousness. It doesn't mean that they have been made available to Arjuna yet, but they've been pointed to. So this yoga of the intellect means that there's a trajectory. There's a place you're heading in which all these current actions that are arising right now, these current influences are arising right now, are either going to take you towards that trajectory or off track from that trajectory. So the Gita at this point is presenting that we have the capacity to choose and to create out of that choice an intent aligned with what will prove to be the original intent, the evolutionary purpose of life. The yoga of discrimination is saying there is a path and there's a way to get there, and everything that's occurring now is the means of getting there. Everything that's arising now are the tools, the opportunities, the setbacks, the problems, the revelations of the bondages and the veils and the ego's influences that are preventing you from reaching that goal. And then, in the process, the revelations, the realizations, the integrations, the correct information in order to overcome these and become established on the track that will take you there. So the yoga of discrimination is different than other paths because other paths tend to seek experience. When someone comes into the spiritual path, they seek experience or they seek the rules of the tradition. In this case, the Hindu tradition was renunciate, to be a renunciate, to become a sannyasi, to wear the yellow robes and to withdraw from the world. And that's what Arjuna was considering, to leave the battlefield to go into the forest. But that is only a partial truth. It was not the truth that would take it, because the goal of renunciation is the end of life, the denial of life, to attain a state beyond life. But in this, the Gita is pointing to a state of consciousness where you're engaged in life yet free of it. So it is not looking for experiences. It's not looking for having a sense of happiness in the spiritual domain alone. That's not the goal, to stay in bliss or to stay connected to that bit of truth that you've been able to access with yourself. It is actually something greater than that. So in this path, when you've set an intent to reach the goal, everything, including your falls, your stumblings, your error, becomes a means of reaching it. Therefore, there's no error, no possibility of loss, because everything is converted into a wisdom. Every blessing is seen as a curse, and every curse is seen as a blessing. And everything becomes a means of taking you on your path. So even a fall is progress. Even an error has its own role to play in the correct action. This is the reassurance. The bottom line, it's speaking to the power, the authority we have innate in our intelligence to set a purpose for our life, to set an intent for our life. And that intent has a great power, much greater than we know, because we don't know fully who we are. But when that intent is set to be aligned with the truth of things, with the evolutionary intent, the original intent that came from creation, it's a powerful, transformative track that takes you quickly, relatively quickly. For those of you who have suffered this journey, relative quickly is an important statement. As the Gita said, endure calmly. These feelings of happiness and sorrow are transitory, passing in nature. They do not have a basis in truth. So when you're enduring those things, it does seem like time is forever. Okay, go on.
Unwise people cannot see beyond their literal interpretations of the Vedas and cling to their own narrow views, declaring through flowery speeches that there is nothing higher than this. These desire-ridden seekers of heaven further proclaim that through these rites one can enjoy the fruits of action and also all riches in this life. Those whose minds are carried away by these narrow interpretations and who are deeply attached to pleasure and power on this earthly plane cannot attain the determinate intellect, nor also the samadhi state. The Vedas deal with the threefold attributes of Prakriti, but one who wants liberation must go beyond these three gunas. Therefore, Arjuna, become free from the triple gunas and be established in the self. When water flows everywhere, there is little role for the water in the well. In the same way, after realizing divine, there is little use for the knowledge of the Vedas.
So Krishna is speaking to the fact that even in his time there were many, many different paths, many, many different teachings that were going on that were not in line with what the Gita was speaking, that they were partial recognitions. And of course, India tradition has many ceremonies and practices and rituals in which people could move into contact with the subtle plane and have spiritual experiences. And these practices and mantras became a way in which many people who entered the spiritual path got stuck. They got stuck because all they were doing was repeating the small piece of experiences that were available to them through these rituals and practices and mantras and techniques. And they weren't progressing. They were staying stuck. The ego took claim to their spiritual experiences, and they used it to enhance itself, to feel good about itself, to become secure in itself. Instead of staying in a state of humility, it came into a state of arrogance, a state of confidence, a state of feeling it could teach others and show others. And we're not making progress. So this is why he was warning of the possibility of getting diverted into these other paths, which are seeking outcomes that have more to do with the ego's fulfillment, the sense of power and pleasure and control, satisfaction. And these were partial. These were not the truth. He says, whose minds are carried away by these narrow interpretations and are unwittingly attached to pleasure and power on this earthly plane. Now I'm a spiritual teacher. Now I have this experiences. So he's pointing to the error that happens to many people who enter the spiritual path and start having experiences. They tend to get stuck there. They tend to take up residence in that spiritual experience and not progress. Because there's something in the ego that enjoys the pleasure and the power and the confidence that comes from that little attainment and doesn't want to change. And you cannot, from that place, attain the determinate intellect. Very important word. This determination to reach for something higher, to go further, not to stop, to keep progressing, to not rest in the little attainments, the little powers, the little knowledges that come along the path, to keep proceeding, not stopping. It is only that will bring forward the true state, which will then allow you to traverse the path steadily. And that's what this chapter is pointing to. The other verses mentions the gunas, but we won't address that in this chapter. There are other chapters where it will come forward more importantly. Okay.
Accept work as a matter of your right, but not the fruits that come out of such works. Let not fruit be the motive of your action, and also do not be attached to inaction. Perform all your actions as a yogi, abandoning all attachment and accepting success and failure with equal spirit. This is called yoga. When action is performed without the yoga of intellect, it becomes inferior. Those who perform actions only with a result motive deserve compassion. Therefore, take refuge in the yoga of intellect while performing action. Endowed with the yoga of intellect, one can be free from both good and evil in this life itself. Therefore, take to yoga. Yoga is the art of getting things done without attachment. Practicing the yoga of intellect, the wise men give up the fruit of action and, freeing themselves from the cycle of karma, attain the eternal state.
Okay. So in these verses, the Gita is beginning to approach the right relationship with action. He had mentioned Dharma. Dharma is basically those actions that are aligned with our innate nature. So this conversation of action is carried throughout the entire Gita. Understanding the right orientation to action is the key. And what these verses are pointing to is the right orientation, which is to take action detached from the fruit, the results of those actions. You take the actions that are required in each moment, and you let go of any investment in the action coming out the way you want it, or in any certain way. This capacity for detached action is what the Gita is introducing in this chapter and will expand on in chapter 3 and somewhat in chapter 4. The art of getting things done without attachment. All you have to look in your life. When you can take action free from attachment to the expectation, to the preference, to the process of how it occurs, and to the outcome, there's much more energy for the action. You just do the action. It's like no big deal. Things that in the past, when your mind would hook in, your stories would come in, your beliefs, your repulsions, your preferences, your tiredness, your feelings about how you are at that moment, and you're not wanting to do the difficult thing. When you get free of those influences, the actions come spontaneously. And it's freeing. It's joyful. It's satisfying. But when you're stuck in the process, when you're struggling with action, then you're miserable. So in my life, I had many activities that I loved. Initially, when I was younger, it was to be an artist. And what I loved to do was draw. It was completely enough for me to just draw. I didn't need anything else. The action was its own reward. And when I got older and I became involved in social work, the same thing showed up for me. There was a love of being of service to people, of helping and in doing things. And later I became an architect, and it was the joy of doing architecture. All parts of it were its own satisfaction, including the 80% drudgery. Became something I just did. I didn't resist. I didn't fight. I didn't try to get out of it. I just did it. And that allowed for me to get things done efficiently, effectively, with the least amount of effort. Now, sometimes situations arise where the conditions are very difficult. And to get a little thing done, you've got to work 2-3 times harder than you would normally work. Well, that's what you do. You accept, okay, it's different. Now, lots of things are going wrong, but I keep taking the actions required. This lack of identification, getting hooked in, making a story about the difficulties and the challenges and the problems, this is the key here. What is the state of consciousness that allows us to be that way? What is the state of consciousness we need to be in so that when obstacles do show up, when these frustrations do occur, when these restrictions or difficulties do arise, that we can be in relationship with them without attachment? This is what the Gita will go on and explain further.
When your intellect will be free from the mire of delusion, you will be indifferent to what you hear and to what is yet to be heard. When through samadhi your bewildered intellect is free from all contradictory statements and rests in the self in a steady and undistracted position, you will attain to yoga.
So this is what the Bhagavad Gita is pointing to. It's pointing to a state of attainment, which in this verse is called samadhi. The Sanskrit word for this is actually sthiti prajan. Sthiti prajan means stable intelligence. What it means is when the consciousness has turned its attention away from the outer world and is dwelling on itself in a stable way. When one has come to that state of stable, it takes time, because initially we turn our consciousness inward, we get a glimpse. Feels wonderful, then it goes away. Then we get a glimpse and it goes away. Why does it go away? Because the outer world is so attractive, it's so demanding, it's so full of story and expectations and influence. And then we have our whole inner conversation that has to do with the outer world, that keeps us endlessly distracted in our head, in our mind, in our mood, in our feelings, in our resentments, in our stories. So if it's not the outer world circumstances, it's the inner endless conversation. So it's pointing to a state of consciousness which is turned inward on the soul, resting on the soul. So it's saying, how can we live? How can we move in this world of action and change and problems and issues? It's telling you how.
Arjuna said, Krishna, what are the signs of a person who has attained the samadhi state? How does he speak, live, and interact with others? The Blessed Lord said, Arjuna, when a person is able to free himself completely from the desires of the mind and is able to enjoy the bliss of the self, then he is said to have attained the samadhi state. When a person is not perturbed in a situation of sorrow, is not attracted to pleasure, and is free from attachment, fear, and anger, he is said to have attained the samadhi state. When one is free from infatuation and adoration, and neither rejoices at achievement nor feels dejected by adversity, he is said to have attained the state of equanimity. Like a tortoise withdrawing its limbs from all directions, a man who has attained equanimity is capable of withdrawing his senses from the objects of pleasure at will.
So these verses are describing the symptoms of one who has this stable intelligence, this samadhi state. So all these are describing what it would look like, what would it feel like, this ability to be completely free, himself completely from the desires of the mind, enjoy the bliss of the self. The not perturbed in a situation of sorrow, not attracted to pleasure, free from attachment, fear, and anger. One is free from infatuation, adoration, neither rejoices at achievement nor feels dejected by adversary. This is the state of equanimity. Equanimity is another description of the sthiti prajan state, the samadhi state. It's the ability to have all things to be equal. That pain and pleasure are equal. There's not one better than the other. Happiness and sadness are equal. Not one is better than the other. This moving into relationship to the dualities of this existence by accommodating, allowing for both without having a preference is the state of equanimity. It's also reflected within yourself, because in the state of equanimity, you're in a state of stillness and quietude. Even when the perpetrations rise up, something you could get excited about, or something you could become appalled by, or something that becomes a dread versus something that brings an anticipation and a happiness, they're all equal. They're just energies. They're just things that are happening. But where you are is you're resting in the still center of existence. You're the still presence in which existence arises. It's pointing to a state of consciousness where you are free from the endless pinball life experiences, going from one happiness, sorrow, feeling good, feeling bad, this or that. It's coming out of that matrix of entanglement, of bondage, of veiling, of truth.
When a seeker abstains from pleasures for a long time, his senses turn away from the objects. However, the taste for them persists in him. This relish also disappears when a person experiences the supreme and samadhi state. Arjuna, so turbulent are the senses that even the mind of a wise man who has practiced self-control is carried away forcibly by them. To be linked with me and to retain that state, one must control his senses. When the senses are under control, one attains the state of equanimity.
Here's the secret. This is the key. When we control the senses, which means that when the signals come in from the outside world, through our eyes, through our smell, through our sound, through our touch, through our taste, these are what keeps us constantly dancing in our egoic habit, in our identity as an ego. When something comes in and a signal comes in, something someone said, maybe a rumor or a gossip or a piece of news, it goes in and activates a mechanism within yourself for good or ill. So controlling the senses really means controlling our reaction to the bombardment that comes to us through the senses. The senses are a means to experience the outer life. Therefore, when we begin to control the senses, we in fact begin to control our outer life by withdrawing our consent to our reaction. Taking a pause, stepping in at the moment of the arising of the signal, and choosing to act or not act based on that presence. This capacity to control the senses takes time, because without us knowing it, by our unwitting, complete identification to our body and our mind and our vital, we're run by the mechanism of reacting and responding to the signals that come through our body. By restraining those signals, by training ourselves over time to become present and to notice how a signal affects us, to catch it while it's causing its action, either towards anticipation or enthusiasm or happiness or to pain or sorrow or dread or fear, noticing our reaction, we can choose to act or not act based on those impulses. We can withdraw our consent to run away with the senses, to be taken away on the ride of our reaction. But it takes time. It's what I always like to say. When the event happens, we react. Let's take a negative reaction. Somebody says something, we get angry, we blow up at them, we make them wrong, and we create sorrow and disturbance and discomfort for both people. You all both go off into your own rooms, and then you're sitting there and your mind's dwelling, trying to make itself right, trying to find a way to resolve it, either to blame the other person or to blame yourself. And you're in this process of trying to handle the reaction that came. And then maybe, after enough time passes, you say, wow, look at what happened. Look at what overtook me. I got took over. I could have done something different. I could have acted different. So when the gap occurs between the event of the sensory input, where the signal comes in, and our waking up to the fact that we were in reaction. Because previously we are the reaction. We don't know we're in reaction. We are the reaction. They're an asshole. They've just betrayed us. They said the wrong thing. They insulted us. They triggered something. We are the reaction. We're just the conditioned egoic identification. We are not the soul. We're the vehicle. We're the jiva, bound in the world of samskara. We don't know jack shit. And we're just being bounced this way and that way. The distance between that and becoming aware that we reacted, that distance determines or is a measure of your state of equanimity. The more you catch yourself reacting, instead of 2 or 3 days later, Maybe it's the next day, or maybe instead of 12 hours later, it's 8 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours. We move into presence with that unconscious mechanism that's running us. The more we do so, the more we can begin to control the reaction. When we actually come to present time with what is arising, you'll notice you have a choice. You'll have a choice to run off one way or the other way, towards enthusiasm and anticipation, or to anger, reaction, judgment. You can choose. And if you're in that moment of choice, then you come to that state of the possibility of equanimity. Presence and equanimity are the same thing. Presence and samadhi are the same thing. This ability to be here now with what is arising is the same thing. The more we restrain our impulses, the more we restrain our reactions, the more determinate our intellect becomes. The more determinate, I should say, our intelligence becomes. The more capable of the soul is in coming forth and expressing itself through our discrimination to recognize this is what's true and this is what's not true. The more we move into the samadhi state. This is the key, restraining the senses. Now this might be as small as controlling the impulse for eating. It could be as small as controlling the impulse to play on the computer, or to go on to the dating site, or to seek new relationships, or to jump every time the phone calls. It might be as small as simply restraining these little minor, small activities and redesigning them so that they fit accordingly with your purpose, with your intent. So this restraining of the inclination of the senses is the most powerful tool in reshaping your consciousness's identification with itself as the persona, as the person, as the jiva, as the personality, the ego, and its relationship with itself as truth, as the soul, as the self, as being.
Attachment to the senses comes when the consciousness is allowed to dwell on sense objects. From attachment comes desire, and from desire comes anger. From anger comes delusion, and from delusion comes confusion of memory. Due to a confused memory, reasoning is clouded, and one loses the capacity to discriminate. When this capacity is lost, one is completely ruined.
This is what I'm just describing. When you let a signal come in and you get swept away by the signal, this describes what is the process, what's happening as you get swept away with the signal. It's because you're attached to the information that you heard through your senses. You're attached to having things your way. You're attached to the things you want. That's why you get frustrated. You're attached to the outcome. You've got an investment, a desire, or a fear that gets activated, and your attachment to those is what sucks you in. Once it sucks you in, your consciousness gets hooked onto it. That's what sucked in means. It means the quality of your soul's radiance, which is your consciousness, gets focused as attention on the issue, and it becomes absorbed and identified with the issue. It loses its sense of itself in that identification and absorption. From this attachment comes the desire. The desire would be not this way, or more of this way. The desire would be either of those. This desire then can create anger. Because the anger can come if you have an investment with an outcome. The anger comes when the outcome doesn't come. They didn't tell me they loved me. They didn't give me the feedback I wanted to hear. They're not showing their appreciation. It's whatever that investment. Then what comes is anger, and from anger comes delusion. What is delusion? That's a story you make about what just happened. Delusion is the web of of recriminations and judgments and rationalizations and justifications. That's the delusion. We create it, trying to make ourselves right, make it so that it's okay for us to be that way, so we can be justified. And then, of course, then confusion of memory. Well, we start distorting the facts to support our righteous position. We start arguing. It doesn't make any difference what happened. It's whatever I imagined or would choose to remember of what happened. And with the confusion of memory, reasoning is clouded because you don't have the facts. You're not keeping track of what really happened. You're so caught up in your rationalization and justification, that's where you are. You're the machinery. We're going to finish, you'll see. And of course, at that point, you lose the capacity to discriminate. And when you lose that capacity, you're completely ruined. You're lost. You've been sucked in. You're in the rabbit hole. You're in the black pit. You are gone. And this happens many times. Count how many times in a day this may happen. And how often it happens is usually a measure of where you are in relationship with the truth of yourself, where you are in equanimity.
But one who is established in samadhi and has attained the capacity of being neutral to likes and dislikes can derive the benefits from objects of pleasure at will while maintaining serenity. With serenity comes the end of all sorrow, and the intellect of such a seeker remains easily fixed on the self. If the intellect is not fixed on the self, how can thoughts be linked with the self? And when thoughts are not linked, how can one derive peace? Without peace, where is happiness? As the moving wind causes a boat to drift on water, so also the mind, when linked with any of the senses, carries away the intellect from the self. Therefore, Arjuna, know it for certain that the person whose senses are completely restrained is the one who has attained the state of equanimity.
The Gita uses the word self with a capital S to describe the soul. And it's actually, technically, is an interpretation from Sanskrit. So it basically is calling the self, with a capital S, the Atman, which is a portion of the soul that's associated with the jiva, or the human system, the human body. So the self is the effective descriptor for the soul that's available to us while we're on the path, the spiritual path. So this comes up fairly frequently. So the idea here is that by being in touch with our self, or with the soul, we can move into relationship to the Dharma that we are here to perform, that is true and in alignment, which would allow for the purpose of life to be expressed as to the highest good in that one moment. So it allows us to be, wittingly or unwittingly, a channel or an instrument from the divine, for the divine intent in the creation in that moment.
That which is like night to all beings, where the self-controlled is awake, and that in which all beings are awake, is like night to a seer. As the sea is ever unchanged, although it receives all the waters, so also a man of equanimity is always at peace, even though all desires enter into him. The man who has given up all desire and is free from longing, egoism, and hankering is fit to attain supreme peace. Arjuna, this is known as the supreme divine state. When such a state is attained, one is no longer deluded, even at the time of leaving the body, and remaining in this state, he reaches the state of nirvana. Thus ends the second chapter of Gita, entitled The Yoga of Discrimination.
This state the Gita is pointing to is the state of unconditional love. It's a state where everything is accepted. Everything is allowed. Everything has permission to exist. Yet you stay true to what is the truth. As the sea is ever unchanged, although it receives all the waters, negative, positive, poison, bliss, all the waters, So also a man of equanimity is always at peace, even though all desires, which we should say, all experiences, all inclinations, all impulses, enter into them. It's all experienced. It's all felt. But we are absorbed in the poise of the truth of who we are, the soul. This is the ultimate discrimination. And this is what this second chapter of the Gita is pointing to. What is the state, what is the attitude, what is the orientation of consciousness that we can bring into life that brings forward the highest possibility? And this we'll explore in more depth in our next chapter, the Yoga of Action. All glory to Buddha. Now let us meditate.